Oftentimes, build guides greatly distort the DPS that the character does. The most classic example of this is League start builds that wear hundreds or possibly even thousands of exalts in gear, and seem to blow up bosses instantly. This gives people a false perception that if your build isn't killing the boss in 10 or 20 seconds on your first Sirus, your build's bad. And it also encourages people to play glass cannon builds that will die if you don't have a ton of damage, or if you're not a mechanical god. So today, I wanted to show you something a bit more realistic. This is my first Sirus on my Toxic Rain Raider. I don't know exactly how much I spent on the gear. I crafted quite a bit of it for myself. I would say it's fairly safe to say that the chest piece and the bow were about 1x each. Most of the other pieces of gear were probably between 5 and 40 chaos each, with an average of 20. Now keep in mind, there's going to be some pieces that I might have taken 20C to craft, because I got lucky, and if you go look up those exact mods, it's 5x. It could also be that I paid 20C for something, and because I bought it 4 days ago, you'll be able to pay 1 chaos for the same item. Prices shift all the time. This is just to give you a rough idea that I'm not in super expensive gear, and my gear will be down in a POB in the description below if you want to see exactly what I'm using. A lot of the time, people ask me questions like, how much life should I have before I do Sirus? How much DPS do I need? Do I need 10 mil, 20 mil, 30 mil? What makes my build Sirus viable? The problem with that is, it's really never about your build being Sirus viable. It's certainly not about silly things like the number of your HP or the amount of DPS you do. It's about whether or not you as a player are Sirus viable. Have you invested the time to learn the fight? In the first phase, are you going to be running in circles, watching for the red circles on the ground, because that's what's most likely to kill you? Or are you going to be standing there attacking and eat a point-blank die beam because you're not paying attention? In the first case, you can get away with relatively few defenses. In the second, you're going to need a lot. DPS is also something that's very misunderstood. Now, if you look at this, I want you to guess how much DPS my build has. I will reveal it at the end of the video. But for now, just take a guess. I will say that I do have 6 links, so I have 5 supports for both my Caustic Arrow and my Toxic Rain, and I really should have switched to a double Toxic Rain setup so that I could add more damage, which means my damage is lower than it probably should be here. But what's not lower is the support that I get from my patrons and YouTube channel members, who help me to make videos just like this one. People also often say things like, well, Raider's bad for Sirus, which, if your only defense is evasion, that's pretty true. Sirus is a boss, and he only uses spells, so your evasion rating does nothing. Now, you can get spell dodge, and I have some. I have about 50% spell dodge, which certainly helps, but it still means I take a lot of hits. However, I've layered other defenses to make sure that if I take a hit infrequently, it's not going to do all that much. Later on in the video, you'll see me take hits from die beams. I'm not standing there and full tanking it. I'm taking a single blow from that, and my Wind Dancer blocks it beautifully. Similarly, I have things like Taste of Hate, which can help prevent fizz damage. I have Chaos Res, which is a pretty important stat with the buff to poison. I have a Ward Flask, which means after I take the first hit, it should trigger, and I'll be able to take a second hit with damage mitigation that's ideally pretty comparable to my Wind Dancer, giving me 2 chances to mess up rather than just 1. With the nerfs, a lot of people are going to feel like they don't have enough damage for Sirus, and this simply isn't the case. They're just used to not having to dodge or deal with mechanics. If you have a DPS to kill the boss in 10 seconds, to one-shot a single phase, you don't have very much incentive to learn. It's kind of why phases were put in to begin with, because otherwise you could just one-shot the boss and move on with your day. If you want your character to be Sirus viable, you have to be a Sirus viable player. If you're a Sirus viable player, then work on your defenses. Make sure you have a couple layers of mitigation. You don't want to just take every single hit aimed at you. So spell block or spell dodge is pretty good in this regard. You want something to aid with your recovery. For this build, recovery options are very limited. I can't leech, regen's hard to scale, I can't really use life gain on hit. What do? Well, I use a life flask, and I do have some flask nodes on my tree to make my life flask much more effective. It's not perfect, and by the end of a fight, I do start to run low on charges. But it's enough to get me by, and it's enough that if I had portaled out for charges, I wouldn't have ever been in any real danger. Then, beyond those layers, you need some damage mitigation. If you take the full brunt of every hit, something's eventually going to kill you. The enemy's going to get lucky, they're going to crit you, and that's it. For me, this build doesn't have that much consistent damage mitigation. I plan to work in endurance charges, and I plan to work in a replacement for the ward flask eventually. Long term, I plan to switch to Divine Flesh, and in the interim, I could probably put Fizz Takener's Ellie on my chest. This way, I have a good way to mitigate elemental damage, I have a good way to mitigate Fizz damage, and I have a good way to mitigate Chaos damage. This, in combination with my naturally high avoidance, and the decent recovery from a Life Flask, is enough that I should be able to face any boss in Path of Exile relatively comfortably. Am I going to make a YouTube montage on this build of me just standing there and one-shotting the boss, or killing it in 5 seconds? No. The best case DPS here is about 2.5 mil. More realistically, with Wither not fully stacked, I'm looking at having about 1.7 to 2 mil DPS throughout this Sirus 5. But you know what? It's plenty fine for a Sirus 5 at the beginning of a league. You only need a few mil consistent DPS to do all the bosses in the game, the feared included. The rest is down to your own capabilities to dodge, which is, to be fair, far more difficult on the feared than something like Sirus or Uber Elder. So next time you ask someone, or next time you ask yourself, is my build viable for Sirus? Don't think about it as, do I have the DPS numbers or the raw HP? Think about, do I have enough mechanics in my build that if I make a mistake, I can survive it? Do I know the fight well enough that I'm not going to keep making those mistakes over and over and taking hits consistently? And do I have enough damage to get the job done? I only need a couple mil. I don't need to go full glass cannon, because the minute I go full glass cannon, I'll hurt myself in other ways. It should be noted that boss defenses in PoE are very different from mapping defenses. Mapping defenses, you want to defend against a lot of little hits. It's very hard to play in a map without getting hit at all. And one of the best ways to do so is just run faster than the enemies. This hasn't changed. That's why my Raider excels so well at mapping. I can run past things and they try to hit me, but they just fail. Bossing's different. Bossing takes careful planning and action, and so you should approach it in a more reflective manner. What are your experiences with your first Sirus of a league? Is it something that you always feel confident going into, or is it something you dread? Do you tend to brick your first encounter, or emerge triumphant? And if you do tend to brick Sirus, has this video given you some ideas on how in the future you might be able to achieve victory a little bit more easily? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and if you liked the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. A special thanks to my YouTube channel members and patrons, whose generous support keeps me from needing to accept sketchy mobile game sponsorships. If you want the best way to keep up with my video releases and live streams, or maybe just hang out and chat with a bunch of like-minded people, be sure to join the Discord. You can find all these links down in the description below. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great day.